Hi, this is Robert. Who do we have on the line?
Yes. Hi, Robert. How are you? Welcome everyone to our webinar. We have been doing a series of webinars lately, and the topic we chose for today was RPA versus RDA. There's a lot of talk in the industry about robotic process automation versus robotic desktop automation. We figured we'd take a little bit of time. This is a short webinar, half an hour only. Just a logistical note, if you have any questions, please post them in the questions section on your webinar application. We'd be happy to take the questions after we finish our presentation here. Your hosts today are, this is Ahmed Zaidi speaking. I'm the Chief Automation Officer here at Accelirate. And with me is Robert Booth. He's an engagement director and leads our process analysis practice. So he's joined with me. Say hello, Robert. Robert.
Hi, hello everyone. Sorry for joining a little late. I had a little bit of an issue, but looking forward to giving this presentation today.
Perfect. So with this, I will hand this over to Robert, and he will go through some of the topics that we were going to talk about. And as I said, feel free to ask any questions. Take it away, Robert.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ahmed. I just want to make sure it's maybe a delay on my screen. Just want to make sure that you are presenting on your screen, just so everybody has reference. Right now, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, there you go. Sorry about that.
No problem. So, as Ahmed mentioned before, there's been a lot of talk of, especially within the past year, of RDA versus RPA and so on, attended bots versus unattended bots. So we felt it was very important for us to kind of give a brief presentation on kind of discussing the differences, just so you were able to come at this with a better frame of reference. So at a high level, RDA stands for Robotic Desktop Automation, and RPA stands for, of course, as everyone probably knows, Robotic Process Automation. The main differentiators between these two really lie in the way that they are implemented. So RDA really focuses on front office tasks. These are things that are really going to be done on the front end, or something that a user can interact with. Whereas RPA, we tend to want unattended automations, meaning it is all back office. It is not something that has to be monitored or something a user has to kick anything off. RDA works in tandem with humans, where RPA works separately, works independently to complete a task, whereas RDA works in tandem. The way that they are installed is a RDA bot is installed on a single machine for a single user, whereas an RPA bot is installed on a server, cloud instance, or virtual machine, and it can go across an organization. So their scope is really going to be one of the biggest differentiators here. And especially with an initiative going on across the industry, where we are really trying to enable what we call citizen developers, which is what a concept we'll be going over on later in this presentation. You're going to see that really applies mostly to the RDA realm, because that empowers the employees to create their own personal automations that, though may be simplistic, they do save time. So a little analogy I like to use is RDA is like hiring a personal assistant to help you with some simple common tasks, whereas RPA is like hiring additional workers which help your business operate smoother. So instead of focusing on the acronyms RDA and RPA, I felt it was more important for us to focus on bot types. And that's really what's going to feed all of this. So if you see on the left, process automation is really what our goal is. That is the umbrella term. Now, the mechanism in which you're able to achieve process automation are those three-letter acronyms we are also familiar with. So RPA, RDA are the ones that are subject of this call, but you have other ones that are coming across the industry, such as SPA and IPA, so Smart Process Automation, Intelligent Process Automation. All of these are really different. There's very subtle differences between each of these. And it's very important for us to kind of define that before we go forward in saying that the bot is really the most important part. The bot is the intended output of all of these mechanisms. So what we really want to understand, well, what are the types of bots? Now, depending on who depending on the provider, there's a lot of differences in those as well. So we wanted to simplify that. And the way that we've simplified it is basically into three tranches. So you have an attended bot, you have an unattended bot, and then you have a hybrid. So as it relates to the acronyms, when we say attended bot, we're going to be referencing RDA, or Robotic Desktop Automation. It does not mean there are not other three-letter acronyms that also can result in an attended bot. But for our intents and purposes, to simplify this, process automation is the umbrella term. RPA, RDA, SPA, insert your three-letter acronym here. Those are the mechanisms in which we achieve process automation. The output is the bot. The bot is broken into three types. You have attended, unattended, and hybrid, and that's what we're going to be going over with today. So an attended bot, put simply, it is called upon or triggered by a human action. Now, this is something where it's stored on the user's local machine, on their workstation. So that's why that analogy as a personal assistant, it's because the bot is always there. So it's you want to look at it as a digital assistant, and you want to make sure when you're looking at your use cases for attended bots, you need to keep that in mind because it will be stored on your workstation. So this can be something, when done correctly, it increases a lot of individual productivity because you're able to have tasks be performed in tandem while the user is working on the workstation. Whereas unattended, there's a lot more variability in the way it can be run. Anybody who has a more mature COE would know this. It can run on a schedule, a trigger, or an event. So if an email comes in, or every day at 8 a.m. I want to run this bot, that is an example of an unattended automation. Those are going to be the more commonplace that you hear currently in the industry as we move forward into that attended realm. So unattended bots complete tasks on their own. It is not stored on a user's workstation. It is something that is stored on a server or cloud instance of VM, like I mentioned before. And the intent of an unattended bot in a perfect world is that it automates full end-to-end processes. So just put simply between those two. Now, hybrid. This is more of a custom solution. So a hybrid is just as it sounds. You are essentially mixing or putting together both an attended and an unattended bot. And the reasoning for this is, quite frankly, to streamline the end-to-end solution. Some instances are going to arise where you're working on a process and you are not going to be able to handle all of it, or your scope is going to have to be minimized because the RPA bot is only capable of X. Well, by leveraging capabilities of Y, being the attended bot, you are able to create a hybrid solution that increases your scope and allows you to address more of a given process. So a quick example of that is a bot can start, or a process can start as an unattended bot, where it's doing some preliminary validation, or whether it's doing some background steps, and then we can switch to an attended bot where we have some type of human interaction, and then it could go back and ending as an unattended bot. So after the human interaction, the unattended bot picks that case back up, whether it be a loan number, an account number, whatever the process is, to finish out the process. This is something that you'll hear human in the loop. That's a very common terminology used these days. That is an example of a human in the loop automation, where you have a mix between both an attended and an unattended bot, and you're using that capability for you to be able to increase the scope of your automation. So moving forward to the next slide. So this is where we're going to get into the, so I'm going to pass it back off to Ahmed there. This is the citizen developer.
Robert, that was a very good overview of the types of implementations of bots. Of course, as you mentioned, there's a lot of acronyms out there. I guess the idea being, if you have something on a end user's desktop that assists them in doing whatever task they're doing while they can do other tasks, those are generally attended robots. They're just to give everyone an example, I have my own personal attended robots. I have to approve a lot of timesheets. An attended robot of mine saves me a few minutes every week, where it goes through and opens up the timesheet system, approves all the timesheets that are 40 hours. If there's anything overtime, I take a look at it, and the robot pops it up and stops while I'm doing that. So those are sort of good examples of attended robots. There are also examples of other examples that we will go through in later stages of the presentation. I think it's also important within this discussion. I think the the individual that creates the automation also plays a role, but is a lot of times there's a lot of confusion between, is attended always citizen developer, as in, and by the way, I think we've done a few of these um, uh, webinars as well, where we talk about the phenomena of the citizen developer, right? The definition of a citizen developer being, at least in our context, being a person who is not paid to just do automation, a person whose primary job is something else, but they create some automations to make their life easy. So that, in our opinion, is really a citizen developer, and that has been a sort of the initial pitch on the automation software was that. That was the fact that these are low-code platforms. Citizen developers will come in and develop a lot of automations, and then you quickly realize that there's a lot more nuance to it. And then a lot of platforms have introduced newer sort of the slimmer version of their professional studio, which basically is a it makes it more it makes it easier for a person without a lot of technical knowledge to create their automation. So that's sort of the citizen developer, and almost exclusively a lot of the citizen developer today, the citizen developer automations sit on the citizens' desktops. However, we're now seeing that as people transition over from a citizen developer to a person who now gets paid to do automations, they create a lot of unattended automation. So the idea being that usually citizen developers would create things for their own use or the use of their immediate team, and would use sort of slimmer versions of the platform that have a lot of the technical details obscured from it, abstracted from it, so that it makes it easier for the citizen developer to use it. So these tools are becoming increasingly popular. The interesting thing about our for the folks like myself who came from an IT background, the shadow IT or business IT sprawl that creates a lot of technical debt in terms of automations that may be running, and you don't know what they're doing, you don't know who wrote them, you don't know who runs them, you don't know what the code does, you don't know how it was written, so on and so forth. A lot of those concerns have been addressed with the citizen developer platforms for these quote unquote, as Robert mentioned, the overarching umbrella term of RPA, and very specifically RDA. Usually these automations can be managed from a central location by a central COE. Not only can they manage what is being automated, they can also control, they can also provide some policy and some restrictions and some security guidelines, and can monitor how, when these automations are executed and what they're doing. Hence, you have some risk mitigation there of the person who created the automation. That's great. You have all this efficiency, and if they leave, what happens to that automation? So you have a central management of that. Usually, citizen developer projects take Excel automations. They combination of Excel, Outlook, and some other application, and we'll talk a little bit about those automations in our samples or examples that we talk about later on. So with that, I'm going to move forward to some use cases where Robert is going to talk about a loan origination use case, which helps a loan processor go through information that they would have gone through on the screen, but it just helps them do it much faster and makes a lot of the decisions much easier. So go ahead, Robert.
Sure, thanks, Ahmed. So for this particular use case, the client is in the loan origination space. So when we were first looking at this area, this department, their operations department, they had a very large amount of volume coming in, specifically because of the reduced mortgage interest rates. So they had to accommodate that increased volume. Now, that's a very prime use case for RPA. But what we found is that that RDA could also play a role into this, because you have to consider that every use case you find, you don't always have to have it fall under just one tranche. You're able to, like I said, provide a custom solution. So what we did is we first wanted to look at how the process looks at it from a high level. So from a high level, the process that receives this loan application, and what they're doing is basically taking that application, looking through all of the available documentation, and there is set documentation such as W-2s, mortgage notes, identification information, title commitments, and so on, standardized documents, and some that are unstandardized that are required in order for an underwriter to make a decision on that loan. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this automation, but what we found was that with their system of record, the way that their process was set up is that not every loan application that went into the processor's pipeline had all necessary documentation. It's a very common occurrence. And what would have to happen is if that documentation was not available, the processor not only could not validate, of course, that document, but they're not also able to send it over to the underwriter. And they have to send out an email or request to that borrower requesting that documentation. So instead of the user having to go through the system of record to determine, well, what documents do we have and what do we not, we decided an easy use case that could be done quickly. And quickly is the key word here, because we want to make sure we're providing value as fast as possible, is that when the processor receives that application in their pipeline, the bot actually looks through the system of record for what available documentation is there. Now, because it is a very common occurrence that not all documentation was ready for the processor to review, what the bot did is it drafted up an email that the processor would normally send out to the borrower requesting that additional documentation. If the documents were available, so that all documents were provided by the borrower, then the processor can go straight to review, straight to validation. So the bot was able to prioritize the processor's pipeline accordingly, because as you can imagine, they, especially with these reduced interest rates and this increased volume, you could have a processor with 20, upwards of 50 applications a day that they have to review. Not all of those applications had all of the documents necessary for them to be able to do their review. So they would have to go one by one for them to look at each of those loans and then their corresponding documents to even make the decision, oh, yes, I am able to review this, before sending it to an underwriter. We felt that that was an inefficiency that we can quickly address through RDA. So what the bot did is basically, if the documents were available, it would prioritize that processor's pipeline by loans that were ready for review. For those loans that were not ready for review because we were missing documentation, it would determine which documents were not found, draft up that email, and then the processor would review that email and then send that out to the customer. So this is an example of a very quick and easy automation that we're able to get up quickly, but it also is an automation that is something that solves every processor's problem. It's something where the scope of that in terms of value is very wide, because every processor more or less is going to fall into one of those situations where there was not all documentation ready and we needed to reach out for that documentation. So by providing that simple validation, we were able to save a couple of minutes per person per loan. Now, that may not seem like much when you look at it from a micro perspective. From a macro perspective, when you have tens of thousands of loans that you're processing a year, that adds up into significant savings. And a significant saving that is able to be accrued and realized in an efficient and quick manner. So this is a very, very good use case that we have, but this is from a professional perspective, right? These are our developers at Accelirate that this is what they do. So what we also have in this next use case concept, but from a citizen developer perspective. So this particular use case is a different client. This one is focusing actually in the oil and gas industry, but it's in their finance area. And essentially what the bot is doing is it's taking a report, and then it is providing preliminary validation on this report so that the user is only getting loans that are basically exception cases. And if you see there, what they're basically doing is taking a report, ensuring that all the line items are there. If so, then it's filtering by certain criteria. If the criteria has been met, it'll go ahead and delete or reconcile this sheet. If not, it will send it over to the user for them to finish that reconciliation. So this is something actually that, and Ahmed could provide more context on in terms of how that initiative came about with from a citizen development perspective. But this is a bot and a use case that was created not by dedicated developers, but by business users that were enabled by RDA, by these new tools from UiPath, as well as other providers, to be able to get that quick and efficient savings. But we are enabling them to do so. So just wanted to give those two perspectives, because it doesn't always have to be something where a professional developer would have to do it. That is the purpose of the citizen development initiative, is that they know their processes better. So if we're able to enable them to identify as well as develop for those processes, then we're able to get tandem benefits.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Robert. Obviously, there are tons of other use cases. We see a lot of use cases in a call center scenario where while the call center agent is speaking to the customer, the robots are pulling up the records that are required in order to service the customer in the various systems. We all hate those. The comment, "Hold on one second while I pull up your record." These robots actually assist in doing exactly that. When either the IVR or the customer service agent pops in the customer identifier, the robots are able to be triggered based on those identifiers and pull up customer records or perform various actions with a customer where you had a couple of systems that weren't integrated. When the customer address was updated in the CRM, the robot was designed to watch, quote unquote, the fields within the CRM for change. Once the page was submitted, the robot took the changed address and was able to pull up the mainframe system and update the customer address in the mainframe system. So these are all examples of RDA, the desktop automation type automations. We will open this up. We have a few minutes left here for questions, about 3-4 minutes. So we'll open this up for questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the questions tab over there and go to webinar. We have a couple of questions. There's a question here that says, for an environment with several employees with the same job function, if an RDA could benefit all of them as an assistant, would that be needed to upload it to the server level or just on each client's computer? Again, it depends upon the use case. If the use case is that you would like for this process to execute in front of a user, for them to be able to either monitor it, or for them to be able to complete it, or for them to be able to provide feedback on it, or just save time, you would have to do this on each person's computer. If this is a process that can be completely unattended, what you can do is you can take the same client-side automation and create it into a unattended automation and then run it at the server side, but then you just have to figure out how to actually make it so that automation can run completely unattended, and the communication can happen back and forth between the user requesting the automation and the user and the actual bot doing the work. All right. We have a couple of more questions coming in. Let me see. All right. So we have a question, as I mentioned, about monitoring of desktop automations and how that happens. Almost all platforms, RPA platforms today, will give you the ability to not only monitor what the automation is doing, but how it's run, when it's run. And again, there's two types of sort of developers who develop these automations. If you have a professionally developed attended automation, which was developed specifically to help a large number of users do a task and save a few minutes off their task. These automations are generally professionally, quote unquote, developed and then deployed through a central location down to the desktops, and these are the types of automations that you see quite often in the call center area, or even hybrid automations where you have folks who need to respond to a subjective decision in the middle of a process. Hence, these automations are sent down from the server side and pushed to the clients. But almost all of them allow you to do monitoring as well as logging, as well as compliance checks and how they're run, how often they're run, what they're doing. They can all be managed from a single location and from the COE.
Okay, I mean, it's 12:30 now. I just wanted to mention that as well, to kind of coincide with this. I know we're doing some webinars as well on this subject, but we are going to be releasing a white paper that's going to be going over the concepts that were kind of covered in this presentation. So that should be available hopefully by the end of this week or early next week. That'll give you a lot more context and on a more micro level than what we just discussed here. And if anybody has any questions, you will always feel free to reach out to us. And I really hope you enjoyed the presentation today. And unless you have anything else, Ahmed, I think that's it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Feel free to reach out to us. The email that you used that sent you the reminder on this, or you used to register, you can respond to that, or reach out to any one of us at Accelirate, and we'll be happy to help you with anything else, any other questions you may have. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.